This is the What Do You Know show hosted by Rio and my co-host Griff.
Yo.
Griff, give the disclaimer for everybody in the audience right now because we have a live audience on set. What's the disclaimer for the people out there in the world?
We have an up-and-coming true gamer amongst our midst, and he talks to himself. He's 6 though, so give him some credit. He's just in his zone.
Yep, and we love the youngins, so we want to keep them around. So if you hear any kind of other audio, then that's just what it is. But let's not waste any more time on that. We got a very, very, very special guest in the room we're interviewing today. His name is Jonathon. What's up, John?
What's up, Rio? What's up, Aaron? Thanks for having me.
Absolutely,
pleasure to have you here.
Yeah, very special guest for a very special reason. As you can see, we got UKNOW Co clothes on the table. He brings all the rough concept designs to life for us. He does the What You Know show logo. He has his graphic novel in writing right now, and he's just a prolific artist. And I hope that's a good enough intro, but tell him a little bit more about you, John.
Very busy man.
Very busy man.
Yeah, as Rio said, I'm a graphic novelist, busy working on my own series called Gunbara, several others, Tales of Badonia, Ganokin, Half Deads. I'm expressing my creativity to multiple forms of media, whether it be clothing, animation, drawing, comic books, even sculpting and statues at sometimes. So,
like with clay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Recently, just been doing anything I can get my hands on, basically. So, been doing art ever since I was a young and never stopped putting the pencil down and just kept honing my skills and training. So.
And do you think that was just a natural inclination for you as a youngin', or did someone like an influencer influence you to pick up the pen and the paper and like express yourself in a creative way?
I think it was more my mother who nurtured that talent, because when I was young, I used to build a lot of structures, and that was just like I would gather things from around the house, like old buckets and things, stack them, make statues, different designs. I was always just trying to pick, and I had a tinkering problem too. I would like pulling stuff apart, seeing how it works, and I think just trying to figure out how the world works and interpreting it through my own lens was one of the reasons that just nourished into what it is now. Did
Legos play a big part for you? Because when you had said that, I was thinking about how Legos were like great. I actually thought I wanted to be an engineer because I could put together Lego sets. And then when I realized math had something to do with engineering, I was like, nope. But Legos, was that something that also like bolstered your idea and design?
I would say Legos, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with Connects.
Is that the magnets?
It's
no,
they're like rods and they look like gears almost. Like
bro, and then they had the circles with the divots, and you could like make all kind of And
it came with its own motor, and you could I would build things like Ferris wheels and things like that.
Yes.
So.
That's some 90s stuff right there. I don't know how they lost a race against Legos, bro.
I have no idea.
And you don't know what we're talking about.
I probably do. I had everything.
They came in that cylindrical tube. Bro,
dude, I didn't look at the name of the stuff I had. I'd pour it on the ground and just go ham.
Man, those were amazing.
It was so many pieces, and it was K'(NEX) Connects. It was amazing.
I probably had them. Maybe.
Yeah, I mean they were. I don't know how you could forget them if you had them. But another question that I had wanted to ask is because you've developed so far in terms of the skill of your art, and an interesting thing that you've more recently done is set out your idea for commissions, what you're going to pay for a certain type of idea. What kind of made you have a regimented list of what you will do for what price, and what expectations have to be set with your customer?
So recently, the way that developed was I'd been getting swindled. People were not paying me properly, and people were kind of just running off with things. Like they would probably take like the roughs and things that I had, and they would just be like, "Oh, I'm cool with this. I'll just get somebody else to finish it." And so I was like, "Okay, we're gonna lay down some ground rules here." So one of the rules I have, which was the prominent one that came forward, was you're going to pay me half up front, just like that makes us both happy, and then when the commission gets done, I received the other half. That's what I've been doing now. It's been working great. So it's like, even if they run off, and things with like, I've been having issues with clients so far. As like, I've had great clients, like, don't get me wrong, but you know, there's always a bad apple.
Yeah.
And with just that one client in particular, and on a few other occasions, but just I laid rules down, like things like that, and the whole payment issue and the communication issue was a big thing too, because people weren't responding when I would message them. I'm like, hey, I have an update for you, because I work pretty quick. So I was telling people, you know, if you don't respond to me in 24 hours, I'll just take whatever payment you've given me, and that counts as your commission being forfeit. And like, I guess some people didn't agree with that, and I was like, I'm sorry that you don't want to, you know, follow those guidelines, but if you can't, you're going to have to find another individual to do artwork for you, because these are going to be the ground rules from now on. But also another rule that I had come up with was, it's kind of like my commission guideline. It's like, some people tried to dupe me on things, like they would get multiple characters or multiple logos and they're it on one project or one piece. And I was like, I was thinking about it, and I was like, I should probably charge extra for that. So when I started, it was always like a base, like, okay, here, for instance, is a flat drawing. And for those who don't know what black color is, it just means no shadows. You're just putting color on it. So I'd be like, here's a flat colored drawing, but if you want additional characters, it's going to cost you an extra 20 per character or something, because it takes a lot of time and effort to draw those things. Because you have to make sure everything's lined up. You have to make sure anatomy's correct. And me, I'm a perfectionist. So even if I see, like, if I color something and there's like 2 pixels of color missing, like, I will go in there and correct it, even if nobody else can see it, because it'll bother me that much. But that was pretty much the premise behind all of that.
And I've worked with you pretty extensively up to this point, like not like even before UKNOW Co had come into fruition. I had worked with you just in a lot of different ways, and a lot of the stuff when we had met in high school was kind of pro bono. It was just like, I had like an idea, you would like draw it, and of course I don't have money at that time, and you were just like, bro, like, thanks for like the experience. But now it's to a point where we're in a business relationship, and maintaining a positive business relationship, not just with you, but everybody that, you know, me and Jada work with, is really important. And so the reciprocity of like just respect on a one-to-one level, and then understanding your time frame and understanding, like, for instance, many times I've been like, listen, I want to pay you more for an edit, or like we have already exposed the chibi design. I just was straight up with John. I was like, okay, my hair is not beach blonde. It's like more brown than beach blonde, because it was like Super Saiyan level blonde that he had in the initial construction. Even the hair was something that we were working on too. And just after appropriate revisions, and the best thing is, like, if they're going to work with you, like a client is going to work with you, they have to come at you with clear expectations, because how are you going to read their mind?
Right.
And I know that was another problem that you had why you had set up the commission list, is because you wouldn't hear back from them. You would start to build on your foundations of the rough, and then they'd be like, oh no, I want you to make a whole change to this huge idea that you've already created. And then you're like, I believe in your outline, you say, like, if I have to make a major revision after roughs, it's going to be an extra fee.
It was,
I think 15?
It was more like the color. Because people would be like, I want you to change. Like, for instance, say I drew a picture of a dog, and I had already colored the dog, and people are like, can you please, like, change the lower body of the dog? And I'm like, well, the color's already on it. If I do that, I have to change the line work. I have to redo all the color and the shadows and things. It's not just one thing. And then if I move one piece of that picture, I have to realign the whole anatomy, or it's going to look wrong. And it's like, that takes a extensive amount of time. And this was also back when I was like working, like, you know, I still am working full time, but it's like working full time and then doing commissions. And it's like, I have to have these drawings. It's like, once I get the instructions, if a client's just like, I want a picture of a dog, do whatever you want, that commission is going to be done in like a day, because I know what I want it to look like. But if they give me, the more free reign I get, the faster the commission gets done. So,
and I think an unfortunate, like, and I'm sorry, Griff, like, we're kind of just going, but like, I have one more thing to say really quickly, is like, if you see an artist, let's say like on Instagram or Twitter, and they got 50,000 followers, then you would never come to them and just be like, oh, can you draw me for free? Or can you draw me for $30?
Some exposure.
They're gonna like equate the level of art and the dedication, and they're gonna be like, oh, well, you only have 400 or 300 followers. Why do you expect anything out of me? I just want to, I just want something from you. And they don't even take into account your life and the level of the hard work that you got to put into each and every just line that you draw. And I think that maybe you can speak to that too, because I know we've talked about artists that we've literally looked at some people and we're like, yeah, especially like working with UKNOW Co. You're just like, yeah, I could do that, and they're asking for that much, and I could do it like realistically for that much,
right?
And it's like, I'm trying to be vague here with the people that we've talked about, but like I know you could probably shed some light on that type of paradigm too, right?
Yeah, it's like it's like the same as you. I won't mention names, but it's like I could look at an artist's work and I'm like, I'm not exactly a professional in that line of work, but I'm like, I could see what they've done and the methods that they've used to construct that particular piece, and I'm like, what they're charging you for, it seems like a ripoff. But because their status seems to be air quote higher than everybody else, they can do that. They're allowed to do that because their label so much is worth a lot more than somebody who's just up and coming. But it's like, what are you really charging for? Are you charging me for the amount of work you're putting in, or just because your name is attached to it? And it's kind of sad to think about, because it's like one thing I've learned is like, it's not necessarily how much your art is, like how much you think of your art is worth. It's how much your art is worth to other people and how much they're willing to pay for it.
And that's a huge thing with getting into a brand. I was telling during a show that we did, I had met a lot of our local like competitors in the fashion industry here in Indy, and I was saying like, you're my competition on one level, but the clothes that people wear, they're gonna value like Polo, Ralph Lauren, for instance, at a really high level, and I'm competing with them. I'm competing with Gucci. I'm competing with Hugo Boss. I'm competing with the Target brand. Like I'm competing on multiple levels here, and it's all about the quality of the, in my case, the apparel, the quality that like it has, and then the design. And then I really couldn't have chose a better, more high quality artist to work with than you. And it just is by happenstance or by God's like divine intervention that we had come into like cross paths, and like Jada as well. Like we had all met at Carpe Diem. Like
that was a crossroads.
We were like in the 9th grade, and you were like in the 10th grade. You were like one level above us, and that's crazy to think that now we can metastasize that bond far beyond what how important we knew it would be at that time. And it's all about like just scrutinizing, like, well, for me in my aspect, when I seek out people to do designs, there's only one other person that we've worked with, and I can't even say that I appreciated his quality of art more than yours. Because like I not only because we worked with another artist for an instance, we worked with you for the breadth of our catalog, and I'm just like, not only the ease of communication that I have with you, but the same, if not higher level quality that you produce is like second to none in my opinion. So the importance of bonds is really important to me. And I feel like you kind of have a little bit of an idea with that, like working with Rex and Elijah, like how crazy you wouldn't have known, like when y'all had all met, that you would metastasize into a big bond through music. But it obviously has created, see Breeze out here doing his best, doing the most.
Well, I think what that is I mean, us being young, you have to even like consider whoever thought that we would even go forth to do something as big as, whatever. Crazy because it always gets bigger. And so
that's,
it's different when you're like in your 30s or 40s and you've already done a lot of great things. And then maybe you do something even greater in your 40s and 50s. But I mean, being young, like everything is fresh and new. So when something actually is a big deal, it's like, wow, I can't believe we did this. So now it's like, oh, what else are we going to do?
Bro, in relation to that's for sure true. Like in relation to the Patrice O'Neal episode that we just shot, Bill Burr had a very interesting point where you had just touched on. He had said that if you're going to do something and you're going to commit and you're going to do it right, you're not going to see the big payoff till you're about 35, 40.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So it's all about putting in that hard work and time. And a huge part about like the bonds and metastasizing the bonds that I was just discussing is I've hinted it maybe 2 or 3 times on this show that I'm writing a book currently, just a novel, like a type of sci-fi dystopian type envisionment of the future. If we were to go down a certain path that I view as destructive for society, and I'm gonna increasingly get more, or I'm gonna get increasingly less vague as I get closer to the release of my self-publication. But I have found, like, between you two, no better resources to turn to, because Griff, as you know, I've been talking to you about this story since, like, here and there, junior year, but then senior year, I was actually getting further with how I envisioned the plot. And Griff, in his Griff nature, was just like, I feel no motivation with that antagonist. I think your story is too big. I think, you have to loop in more. You had too many characters.
Yeah, it was a lot.
It was far too broad.
It was a lot that didn't give you a whole lot.
Exactly. And that's really just because I had lacked a hardcore vision of what, first of all, my inspiration was, but more importantly, what I wanted to achieve from the narrative itself. Yeah. Like, when someone takes my book and reads it, my whole idea was 3 acts, and there were going to be 3 different books, and it was going to be huge, intergalactic. I've boiled it down to 1 book for 3 acts of 7 chapters each, and then instead of intergalactical, like just intracontinental. Yeah, taking huge advantage of just big locations instead of how Star Wars uses planets as cities. Yeah. And I've been bouncing consistently ideas off of you ever since senior year. And then more recently with John, I've been able to discuss certain plot lines, certain character motivations, and even naming characters, because that's actually my biggest thing right now, is I have some characters I haven't had a hard time naming. And I don't know if you want to get into the reciprocity with your graphic novel and how, like, I help you, or do you?
Oh yeah, I can get into it.
Well, I was just going to say, like, because since you do want to get into it, you've also tapped into me as a resource for editing, like actual word, pen to paper, like, and just even spitballing my ideas off of Griff. And then I was talking to Alex about my story. Like, I never even told him I was writing a book. I had no idea. Yeah. And I hung out with him for like 3 hours. I was talking to him for a good hour, 45 minutes just about my book. And I was giving him everything. Because you don't want spoilers. Basically, a lot. And I was giving him like everything. And he was just blown away by it. And he was like, yeah, I didn't even know that you were writing a book. But so, like, in between you two, like, you need really solid people you can trust to work with. And I think I've been some of help for you in your graphic novel you're writing, right?
Yes, both of you have, actually.
Right, it's a whole thing.
I remember when I was in Bloomington, and Aaron, we had a sit down, and Aaron was just like, "Your story's confusing." And I was like, "How so?" And I was like, I was receiving all this criticism. I'm sitting there, like, I actually had like paper. I'm writing all this down.
I wasn't offended. You weren't offended when he said that. We really wanted to know, like, what would he mean?
Because he was just like, he was like, the action's cool, but then you cut the action, and then I was lost, and I was just like rereading. Like, I was, I had my old script because I still have it in my Google Drive, and I was rereading it, and I was just like, he's absolutely right. Like, where was I going with this? Like, where's the character development? Where's the story? Like, where is this feeding into these characters? And I basically scrapped the whole thing and used it as almost like an outline for what the new story is. And it's so much, it flows so much better now. And the character development, so far as like what I've been watching, because I've taken a lot of inspiration from Avatar: The Last Airbender and Full Metal Alchemist. Those are one of like my 2 favorite shows for character development. But I basically started, like, even like now, it's a lot easier to write characters because I write them on the basis of certain characteristics instead of just like, oh, I want this character to do cool things, or this character's here because of the plot.
And you were telling me you don't like to write tropic characters based on tropes.
But not for my main characters. I like my main characters to be very dynamic. But when I think I've shown you guys the character designs for my characters. Like, even their personalities and stuff are built into their character designs. Like, for instance, Miami, which is the hothead. She has red hair. She wears her clothes sloppily. She has bandages on her arms for fighting, scars on her face. Like, it feeds into who she is. She's a hot-headed fighter type character. That's what I wanted to do. She's also a bit of rebellious, which is why her uniform shirt's unbuttoned and she wears like a yellow tank top underneath, and just little cues like that to feed into people like that. Because I have to write and draw this, so it's like I have to take all that into consideration. Because it's like if I take one misstep and people are like, okay, your character's gloomy and depressed, so why does she have like, you know,
polka dots and
like why
sunflowers?
But you know, sometimes as far as character development, like stuff like that works if the message of the story is to like, or one of the points of the story is to show like nuances and sort of the irony of someone who can be very depressed but seem somebody who's very polka dot. Like that'll draw attention to a person. Is why do they look happy if they're actually really sad?
Like an essential juxtaposition.
And that's always where like character development is powerful, because you can explain a person's like you can explain their juxtaposition through their history, through their home life, their origin, stuff like that. And as a, you know, in the same light, just because you give cues to show that someone is hot-headed, you know, because you want to draw this and show it. I mean, you can always just drop like little hints, like this person is a hothead because their grandfather owned a dojo, and maybe some real messed up thing happened and they lost their parents and they were raised by their grandparents.
Yeah.
So they're not just a hothead, but they're someone who respects their family, they respect their elders, and they want to continue tradition passed on through their family. Like,
yeah, or even something so small where like, even like, let's say it's a male character, they're bald because they don't want their hair getting in the way of how fast they twitch their head. Something like little
something like that.
You could go that far in depth with things. Yeah,
it's whatever you want. But I think it's easy to do character development with little things like that. Like you don't have to say all that. As soon as you have all of the visual things, and then you mention something like, I'm going to kendo practice, just in dialogue, and then maybe that adds a little more to the character themselves. And then maybe somewhere down the line they say, well, I was talking, my so and so taught me kendo, or my brother, or something, just anything, and it's just like. Peaks, like glimpses.
What you do with those is you set a little bit of a seed in somebody's mind as they're reading. And we were talking about this on the phone. They seem like throwaway lines, but they're very specifically placed.
Important.
Important.
Exactly.
Important lines. Those and like, because I don't have to draw my characters, for not just brevity for my story, but just like having nice cohesion in my story. And limiting it down to the essential like nature elements, I'm gonna not spend a lot of time kind of really talking about the appearance of the characters, despite the fact that that's very important to me because I care about fashion. But I'm totally gonna invest a lot of time in just sorry, we have our studio audience here. Just invest a lot of time in a subversion of expectation, because that's what Griff was just touched on. Because you have tropes because they set up the expectation. You're automatically familiar with the trope. But when you subvert the expectation, that's when a character really gets deep and important.
And that's what you were talking about with I don't know if you've read the recent revisions, but it's like these throwaway lines and stuff, they're going to be these seeds that break open the story. For like, for instance, I can drop a line without spoiling anything. One of the characters, the sisters, are sitting in this room and they're all discussing like what happened at school the previous day. And she's saying, maybe we should tell our older brother. And she's like, yeah, because the last time we kept a secret, it didn't turn out that well. And they're like, we shouldn't keep secrets from our brother. And everybody's like, well, what secret are they talking about? And that secret is going to break open a lot of their background information of like how they act, like why they act the way they are. One of the sisters, like, because when I draw these characters, these are just base like characters, how they're going to be at the beginning of the story. Like, because I want to get these ideas on paper, because I'm like, if I don't, they're going to drastically change. Because one of the characters who dynamically changed in design was Isa, which is the love interest. And I've drawn her maybe like 40, 50 times. And I finally solidified a design that I liked. But these characters are going to be base design, and then, they're going to transform throughout the story, because that's just how I want my characters to be. Most of the main characters are going to be dynamic. Some may be tropic, but it's going to feed into the story for that reason.
Let me ask you, what if any, do you think is the relationship between the character's design and their like character profile?
So, for instance, Mia, which is the reserved sister, she's very tall.
Yeah.
She's got normal brown hair. So basically her hair doesn't stand out at all.
Yeah.
She's very, even in her pose that I've drawn her in, she's very shy looking, and she has a lot of, one of the designs I put on her was a rain cloud that's constantly raining down on her.
Okay.
And it's, one, I put that rain cloud there to break her silhouette up. So that's a specific symbol there. So people know that it's her. If I took her entire character design and blacked it out, people would know it's her just because that rain cloud's there. If you ever seen like Fairly Odd Parents, you can black out all the fairies, but you know that's Cosmo or Wanda because you can still see their floating crown.
Right.
But when I was going through her character design, I was like, I want her to be quiet. I want her to be reserved. I don't want her to stand out. So I gave her normal hair. Like brown hair is a natural occurring color. I made her tall because her tallness, she's only a freshman and she's almost as tall as her brother. So she gets made fun of for that, which is one of the reasons that she retreats a lot and she's very, secluded except around her family because her family doesn't make fun of her for that. But also her afro hides half of her face. And it's like, I take all these things into consideration when I'm drawing my characters, but also like she wears her uniform normal. Like there's no standout type designs or anything like that because she's trying to blend in. Now her sister, who is the hothead in Miami, she doesn't care. She has bandages, scars, red hair. She dyed her hair red. Like she's always getting into fights and things like that. And then, like I said before, those throwaway lines, they're little pieces where eventually you'll figure out why everybody is the way they are. And it all is stemming from, it's kind of like one things that I really like exploring in the story is like what I call crossroads, where it's like there's a main event and it branches out into all these different characters' lives and how they develop and just move forward from there, because everybody handles stress and different and interactions like that differently. One may be angry all the time because it's like, we could have done something, or one may feel defenseless, one may feel like traumatized from that and withdraw and be reclusive, or one may be like, I saw this happen, it's never going to happen again, and may be overly protective. So
because I think the biggest challenge in terms of how we associate a character's identity to their profile, like what they encompass, is we're trying to blend. Well, no, we want to pump in as much creativity without losing any realism.
Right.
Because we want our stories to connect. We don't want it to be too fantastical. Because I think that's like one of the biggest problems with, for instance, like the sci-fi genre. All the staple classics of the sci-fi genre have way more realism than they do things that are so creative or unimaginable, because you start to have huge disconnects with your audience if they can't even relate. I think making the characters relatable, not just to their profile, but then also their appearance. Or in my book, just basically, because I don't have to draw them out, what I'm doing through the narrative, and that's the big challenge, is I have to blend descriptions of like aura. And I don't even necessarily have to talk about dress. I could leave dress vague if I talk about how someone like perceives someone, because like clothing, it's always the first thing you see about someone. You make a judgment about someone. You don't even have to talk to somebody, but if you see how they appear,
right,
then your brain automatically makes judgments, because how we compartmentalize information, and basically, in other words, stereotype. And then like I can create an idea for my reader about how, if a character is just thinking about when they see somebody, like just based on how they feel, what they see, and not even necessarily describe, oh, he's wearing baggy pants with, boots on, with a, cut shirt, and he's very muscular. I can play around with the creativity of words, and I leave it up to the reader as they're reading, if they're interested, and I want to obviously have them be interested, right? If they're interested, they're going to actually start to imagine things in their mind too. And I think that's my unique challenge. But I don't envy you, because I don't have to like actually create these things. I don't have to just describe I don't necessarily have to describe a hair color or a skin tone or look in the eye.
That's mainly for me too.
Right,
like,
that's what I'm saying.
These people aren't going to be reading these scripts. Like that's for me to be like, oh, this is the character I'm talking about, because I'm going to probably end up drawing close to 50, 60 characters.
And that's crazy. Yeah, exactly. And then you'll leave the rest for your staff to fill in the background. But yeah, another thing, like, and this is something interesting too, I really wanted to get into with, because it's not like we're classically trained, with the linguistics, with a minor in composition, and then,
right.
Another minor in poetic, history or whatever. We're not classically trained writers. And I think, because some of my friends have asked, like, well, where did you get the inspiration to start writing a book? And it's hard. Well, no, it's easy for me to answer, but it's hard for them to understand. Is my simple reply is, well, I've consumed a lot of narrative through the RPG video games that I play. I watch a lot of anime, and I've played, and then I've seen some movies in my time. And through those 3 different things, I recognize patterns here and there, depending on the genre that I like. And then if I branch to another genre, it exposes me to something different. And then I just simply say, like, well, I know I can write. And I bought the tools, such as a composition book called Shrunken White, that help bolster my ability to write. But it's all about me just kind of pursuing a creative vision. Have you ever got that question before? 1, and then 2, like, what kind of encouraged you with a certain level of confidence to start your own story?
So I've gotten that question numerous times, and it's always, I have sort of like a vision, and everybody can look at the same idea or concept, but the thing that makes it unique is your perspective. And with Gunbara, which is the name of the story that I'm writing right now, it's basically an autobiography, but it's mixed with shonen anime tropes and, devices from that, which are just influence I've had over my life, and books that I've liked, and things like mythologies. Like, for instance, I really liked Greek mythology growing up with the Percy Jackson series and things like that. And I always was interested in just different visions, because even with, gods and goddesses, that's another culture's perspective. And all those things have been incorporated in my story to where I was like, well, I've never seen, or I've seen very little of, characters that look like me on screen. Yeah. Or characters that look like my sisters or my nieces and nephews growing up. And I was just thinking to myself, what kind of narrative did I want to tell using those characters? And just over the years, I've delved into things that have bolstered those skills. Like, for instance, like just doing graphic design. I never thought that, like, I would get into graphic design, but it took me out of my comfort zone, which is what the same thing this story has done, where it's made me forced to get better at writing, and better at character design, and better at character concepts, and better at not just telling a straight narrative, but you need to build characters, you need to build the world, you need to build settings. There's different pieces of the puzzles that I needed to hone in order to create this narrative. Yeah.
And then, like, I guess I can start. My 3 biggest inspirations for my story would be number 1, Star Wars. And I'll just do a quick synopsis of each. Star Wars, because I wanted my story to be that big and impactful, but I realized I'm gonna change, because I love that as an inspiration, but I took from them that they just basically made planet cities, and they had no, like, for the brevity of their story, they're not going to get into the geopolitics of this planet and that planet and that planet. They have a galactic senate, they have galactic representatives, and they have, like, galactic cities that are important. So then I took this huge, big idea, and I just smushed it down to just a continent. Berserk, I took a huge inspiration from, because the main character of that story, you don't necessarily love, it's hard for you in the beginning to, like, root for him, because there's a really great antagonist that is with the protagonist. Well, he's really an anti-hero. But Guts is an anti-hero. And, like, you're not sure who you like more until a certain pivotal point in the story where you realize that, I'm now siding with the anti-hero for the reasons I know I'm siding for him, and that provides the motivation for the reader to root for him finally, right? And then I would say, like, my 3rd inspiration, it's kind of tough, because there's a couple things, like, here and there, but Gurren Lagann is a really good one. and I truly love that story because of the pain of loss, how they utilize pain of loss in that story, loss of life, I should say in particular, is really profound. And the big, I should say, like an anti-government like type force that goes against human nature is something that's like a huge inspiration for my story. And then I would kind of say Oda's an inspiration just in the aspect that he interweaves flashbacks at pivotal moments when you least expected it. So those are kind of like my biggest inspirations. What kind of inspired you?
Oh man, there's actually entire stories that have inspired entire characters in my story.
Oh, interesting.
And it's bits and pieces of everything. For instance, Mia's look, which is the shy looking sister, her look's heavily based on Huey from the Boondocks. And
interesting. I like that.
Like, okay. I can tell you a couple about just characters. So my character, which is Isami Gunbara, he has a very honed Spike Siegel look. Like, he has the nice blazer on. He's got the dress shirt. He has that look down to a T because he's very calm and collected. But inside, he has a lot of internal conflict. And that's where his character is. It's like outside, he's almost wearing a mask. And for instance, Iza, she was inspired by Mocha from Rosario Plus Vampire. I was in high school, was a sucker for long pink-haired anime girls, so that heavily influenced her design, and that's where most of that comes from. But she also has just a sweet and like gentle personality, just like her. And the child genius Sakura, that's the smaller sister. She's actually she actually gets her personality and her looks from my niece, who she's very energetic and she's very intelligent. So she actually sat down with me and designed that character. We did that together, and that was a very, very nice little snippet and little piece from my life being injected into the story. And as for Naomi, she has like these long like pigtails, and that was inspired by Sailor Moon. I really liked that growing up as well. And then the last character, Mayami, is actually inspired by one of my favorite video game characters. Her name is Crimson Viper, and she's from Street Fighter, and she has like this ridiculously long red hair, and it's like Street Fighter always takes their hair over the top, but I pull bits and pieces from different games and media that I like, and I always put them in one character. For instance, I know you're a fan of Little B, and of course, you have a character in Gunbara, and Rio does as well. And Rio's character's powers are based off of Little B's color mixtapes, his color flame mixtapes. And I was working on your character as well, and I incorporated a lot of Mustang from Full Metal Alchemist and things like that. So it's like, different things like that. And it's like, I'll write a character, for instance, I'm like, okay, this character has fire powers, and then I'll be like, oh wow, like, I just saw Mustang from Full Metal, that's a cool power. I'm not gonna steal it, but that's a cool thing to keep in the back of my mind. Like, that's a different way to use that power. And then it's like, you get to the more anime and stuff you watch, like, I have to also limit myself on what I change, because I notice I consume so much media. I'm just like, man, I want that in my story, I want that and that and that, and it's like, it'll get overwhelming.
Yes.
And it'll get very confusing. And so, like, the cast of characters I had, I decided to just like cut down like maybe like 70% of the characters I have. And a lot of the characters only have, a first name. They don't have last names. Only really, really important characters have last names. And that's something that I took from Avatar. And that's something that I learned from there. And just things like that. So I'd say for top 3, it'd definitely be Avatar, Full Metal Alchemist, and Boondocks.
Gotcha. And you brought up a really great point with the real life inspiration that goes into your story, because to be like completely honest with you, there's only one character in my story, and that's my main anti-hero character that draws from any real life like person, and that being me, but being me before like I turned my life over to God and was on the path of being born again, learning the scriptures. If I'd have kept going down that mindset of I don't care to know who I am, I'd rather live by the lie, I'm going to act pridefully, I'm going to act with anger instead of love, I just envision that that's the type of person that would ultimately beget those philosophies, that of just kind of hatred and evil. And that's really because I've obviously changed who I am, and that's kind of where I'm taking my perspective with that character. It's like, and that's what brings it home to me for him. like as I write them, because I'm just like, I know the person that I was, and I don't miss that person at all.
Right.
Like, I'm so glad I'm not that person anymore, but I have a connection with that person because it used to be me, you know, long ago, but I have a connection with him because I'm going to bring that idea to life so I can criticize it. Almost as if I was looking in a mirror, like an evil mirror, where I'm like, I'm Mario and I'm looking at Wario. Like, I'm trying to imagine if that person just kept going down that path of resentment, you know? And I can't honestly say that any of the other characters in my story really, because I don't have to, like I said earlier, I don't have to visualize the characters. I just have to describe them in the mannerisms that I have to. The character that you have inspired based on me was a previous, like in college, I had just had my hair all the way grown out, all the way crazy. Like, my hair is too long as it is now, but this is because of the quarantine. But at least I cleaned this up. But yeah, you had me in that super long hair type character, and like you were just saying, you have a lot of different like real world inspirations. To be honest with you, some of the like, you know, main antagonists build, and then the societies at large that play into the story are predicated on real world or historical figures. But really, it's just a look into the future of like, you know, good versus evil for me. And did you ever fear like bringing out like too much of some, like, because you love the people that you love in your life and that's why you put them into your story? Do you ever, like, is there ever a boundary that you won't cross, like there's too much of somebody in that character? Or
when I write a character, I will, if I tell somebody their character is going to be in the story, it'll never be to a point where if somebody finds out who their character is, it will embarrass them or destroy their reputation. Now, if they come to me and they're just like, hey man, can you make my character, like, I know I'm gonna die, but like, can you make me die cool? And I'm just like, yeah, I can do that for you.
Yeah.
Know, that can be arranged. But it's like, you know, if I come to me like, hey, you're gonna be a villain in this story, they're gonna be like, that's cool. I'm like, 95% chance you're probably gonna die.
Yeah.
But it's those, the way I built the main character isn't just like, oh, he's the ultimate good and he's defeating these people, because he is a normal individual before all these events unwrap. He's never killed anybody. He's never taken a life. Those things are going to cause trauma, PTSD, because it's a human taking another human's life. He's never experienced those things. He's not just this character who's like, oh, I have to do this. Like, he's going to be a great character. Like, he's going to be like, I'm not going to fight this villain even if they're doing things because I'm terrified of what happened last time. Like, for instance, like, there's an instance in the story, and don't worry, all this is subject to change, so this is technically not spoilers.
Okay.
So there's an instance in the story I was thinking about in a future arc where he ends up taking a woman's life, and it hits him so hard because he has built this relationship with his sisters to protect them for so long, and he ends up having nightmares. He ends up having very bad visions. He can't sleep, and it's like after that point he won't fight a woman, which the leader of the main villain group is a woman, and there's a lot of tie-ins to that. But he also struggles with relationships. He gets in arguments with his sisters. He's not a perfect individual.
Right.
And that's what I wanted to explore more of, was these characters don't need to be perfect. They need to be relatable. So
Exactly. Yeah. The realism is important.
You touched on something, and I want to ask you, how is it, let me see if I can frame this question correctly. How is it that you're able to write in such a flexible manner that the story is so subject to change? Like, what are the key points of the story that are concrete, and that you can sort of be sort of free flow with how a particular character dies at a point that seems pretty pivotal, especially if that character is or isn't important. I guess I'm curious as to how much flexibility you give yourself to write to the point that you can alter, certain details like that. I mean, because to me, when I think about if I were to ever put something together, like, everything is going to happen a specific way. And so to think that certain details, like how a character comes in or comes out of the story, those kind of feel like important pieces to the narrative. And yet you kind of seem like you're more flexible with how that happens. How is it that you can write this story and not really have some of those details set in stone?
So as of now, I have a timeline that I've written out. This is from the beginning of the story all the way to the end.
Yeah.
And within those timelines, is like you said, there are major plot points that I absolutely will not change.
Right.
Like but there are subplots in there. So for instance, like when a character comes in, I could be like, well, for instance, this character may be able to control water. It may be a girl. Okay. So it could be like, oh, they went on vacation one day and they met this girl at the beach, which, strategically she would want to be there because she could control water. But it's just things like that. When I introduce characters into the story, I always have to think like, I don't want this character to just like, each one has to think they're different individuals. I want to be like, oh, we're from X villain group and we just came here because our boss tells us. It's like, no, some of them are going to be seductive. Some of them are going to be tricky. Some of them are going to pretend to be your friend. Some of them you're not going to even suspect at all.
Right.
And it depends on, like I said, it's based like around their powers and things like that and their personality, how they approach the story, because it's a very character driven story, more so plot driven. Because there's a main plot, like it's like, typically beat the bad guy, but it's like, you don't know when the bad guy's coming, where they're coming from, what tactics they're going to use, because no villain is going to do that. They're not going to give you a heads up when they're going to attack you or anything like that. But it's like I said, the actual timeline is written out, but I take flexibility in character introductions and character deaths and losses.
Okay, so, but you didn't really answer Griff's question, because Griff was asking you about the flexibility to which you write, and you had said it would be subject to change, whether like an important death could happen in the story by your main character doing it, maybe to, you were saying possibly to a woman. I think what Griff was getting at was, are you super compact in the breadth of your story to where certain key events to key characters could just change like that, or where's the flexibility coming from? Because you were in your response, you were talking about how how a reader reads it. You were saying how villains could come into the story, how they could possibly talk, how they couldn't. You don't want to have those big things. But I think what Griff was, kind of asking was like, well, those are big plot lines in the story. Right. How could you be so flexible as to be like, well, this or that? So that, I think, isn't that kind of what you were getting at, Griff?
You sort of suggested that if your story is like God's written fate, right, then there are certain events that are bound to happen, but everything in between those key events are sort of subject to the characters. And if this were like some kind of simulation, when you could be like, this is this character, this is this character, this is this character, start, go, then those things can happen. But from a writer's perspective, you have to be very intentional with what happens, when happens, who impacts who. Like, those interactions don't just happen. Right. Regardless of who the characters are and how they would react to things can happen very differently, and that is what makes the story. And so, like, my question is how do you determine when to play loosey-goosey with those events that aren't key events, and when it's something just like, that doesn't really matter how that particular thing happens. Like, he could die a tremendous death, right, or he could slip and fall on a banana and bust his head. Like, how do you determine when those things are
not the
flexible?
Classic guy? Whoopsie daisy, death.
It's just you a really died. Comical example. Yeah.
Oh man, getting a Final Destination flashbacks.
Getting some Dark Souls. You died.
But so there's certain characters that I mark actually in the story that are pivotal to the actual plot of the story.
Okay.
So there are specific characters, I can't reveal too much, but
of course.
Well, for instance, like Rios is a major character, but like that's but like, Rios is a major character and yours is a major character, and I mark those characters based on how closely those people are to me in real life, because it's easier for me to write them as a character because I have more information to work with.
That makes sense.
But it's like, if it's just some person I met on Facebook 2 minutes, I'll be like, oh, you're just gonna, like, you don't even get a name, like, goodbye, like, yeah, like, it's like, those are easy throwaway characters.
You know what the throwaway characters look like? They look like this. Go ahead.
I mean, I think that's great, but in the context of the story, right? Because even if your inspiration lies in the real world or in the media that you consume, when it comes to the story, like the story is its own world,
Right.
And so, is it possible that just within the bounds of those characters' story, that certain characters are marked for certain periods? So, like, there's someone who comes in who isn't important for a really long time. And we see this all the time. We watch tons of anime, tons of TV. There are certain characters who are trivial when they first enter, but then they become marked maybe for a season or an episode. Like, and they can't be touched, or they drive the action. Do you do the same thing with character-based story where certain characters who aren't important in the grand scheme of things are important for a set period of action, even if you don't know what that importance is? And how do you handle those characters? How do you determine those characters? What is that feeling like? Because like I said, I would map everything out. Every single thing that's gonna happen this way. And someone says, if that's inspired by me and I don't want to die, like, I'd be like, tough luck, because he's going down like this, and you're gonna feel all of it. As opposed to, no, you're okay. You can die some other kind of way because you're not important.
So when I spoke about characters being marked, it is like I will make notes and things like when because I did say there's a realm of flexibility because this story is still being developed.
Right.
I'm not gonna say it's like 100% solidified because inspiration could be from anywhere.
Absolutely.
But it's like once I write it down and once it's typed out, that's said and done. Because I don't want to be like, oh, I can add this in the back. But like if I forget something, of course I'm gonna go back and make note of it, of course. But for instance, like say I had 3 chapters. And say there's a character that maybe pops up for maybe an interaction in chapter 1, but they end up causing the end of world in chapter 3 or something like that. I will make a note. This is a key character, but in chapter 3. So I make a note of that. It is a reminder of I don't need to play up their position until chapter 3, but I will give them little subtle interactions and hints throughout dialogue or something like that. Like when I was explaining earlier about the whole throwaway lines and things like that, it'll be things like, oh snap, like he did say that back in that chapter and he did hint that he was going to do that. Like for instance, I'm just going to give a random example. I could have a character that maybe sets things on fire. He's a pyromaniac. And he could just say things like, oh man, like I really like, just drop little subtle dialogue hits like, I really like how fire looks. Like if they're out on a camping trip or something, he'd be like, what do you guys think of fire? Something weird like that. People are just like, it's not a real weird question, but it's kind of, kind of caught us off guard. And he's just like, I really
sounds like
fire.
something I'd ask somebody.
Just like,
what is love?
Like fire, this fire is really warm. It's like, what do you guys think about it? Like, if it wasn't just here in this campfire. And then like all of a sudden, like people are like, okay, that was weird, but whatever, we can brush that off. And he changes the subject real quick or something. And then later on, he's setting houses on fire or something. Yeah. You're just like, well, we kind of knew what he was about at the camping trip, and we kind of should have seen this coming, but he's been gone so long, and then like all of a sudden he pops back up and people are like, oh snap, that's that character from such and such. Like in chapter 1 there's a lot of interactions like that because they're in a school, so it's like you'll get a lot of character interaction, but not necessarily, some of it may be to mislead you, because I may set up characters to be like, oh, this character is going to be a villain, but in the end, it was this character. But because this character's presence is so weak, you didn't suspect them.
Right.
Well, I was just thinking too, while you were discussing that, and predicated off of your question, with how I'm writing my story, things have to be very intentional.
Yes.
And because, in terms of just the scope of my story, I would say maybe at most it's a third how big your scope is. Just not even just in terms of drawing, but just in terms of like the actual
scale of
the scale of the story. Yeah, mine is much shorter, much more concise, and therefore, like with Griff, when you were saying how you would write a story, it's taken me a long time to get very intentional about every major plot point.
Yeah,
and now I'm working out the kinks of the descriptive text that I put in for certain characters. Like so those are the things I'm a little bit flexible on as I'm getting everything down. Like you were just saying, if once you get it pen to paper, it's not going to really change at all unless you have some editor look at it and then some like tweaks here and there. Change that. Yeah, but but what I was just saying, Griff, is that you have to be very precise and intentional with the plot, the major plot points that happen, and then once you get those, then you can boil it down to the minor plot points,
Absolutely.
and then after that, minor interactions. But look, I was just one more other thing I was going to say is locations are really important for my story in particular. I know they're important for yours as well, every story, but how I describe locations is very important because I have 2 major locations, and then I have 8 less important ones, and then I just have some locations where scenes take place. Like the hut or the house or like things of that nature, and you don't have to be like they were in the hut. It just takes place naturally, and you progress into the story where things take place. So you have to, like, when you get down and boil it down to exactly the idea, that's when you become far less flexible and far more intentional with the writing.
Absolutely. And that's where the story, that's where you breathe life into the story. Because I've done a few different methods of storytelling just through college and stuff like that. And one of the most impactful assignments I had was tell a story in 24 pictures. And it was the tale of Aventoria with Rex. And so, we probably took over 1,000 photos. And we had to boil down like the 24 that told the story, like front to back. And me and Rex sat down and we probably wrote like 10 to 12 pages. So like trying to get 24 frames, 24 still frames to show what is happening, who are the important people, what are the important places, right? And so once you tell a story like that, you're always thinking about what are the important key frames, like what are the big shots, and then from there it's just like blocking. You got the people in front, and then you got the people in the second row, and it's just like you just filling in details. And you could fill in as many grains of grass as that
are there.
But at the end of the day, like what's the big picture? And then, like you said, the details make the story. Because those are the things that people covet. Is like who said what, who they say it to, how did they say it. Like and then those moments that are created, and
then how did it conjure an image in my mind? Exactly. And I didn't even think I was going to bring this up, but I have to quickly say an important writing exercise for me, just because I'm trying to write a novel, is I've looked at important movies, classical sci-fi movies. I'll take a scene and I've literally tried to transcribe a 2-minute scene on paper. The intentionality of like the camera angles, how it changes, the looks on people's faces, through movies you can just see it. But you see how the director works magic in the angle or the framing and the lighting and stuff, just to create the mood. I've tried very hard in different movie scenes to accurately transcribe it, and I think that's helped my story like tenfold. Because I've been trying to recreate the visual and then create in the imagination.
To that, I'll just quickly say that it is a challenge, especially for like visuals that are created based off of text. And even as great as some of those are, they don't always capture the majesty that a text gives it, right? Because
CG has destroyed it, bro.
I wouldn't even say that. I would just say like there's power in interpretation.
Yes.
Right? And so just writing things very specifically give someone the imagination to see it in a way that movies you have to do 3 or 5 different angles to even capture the majesty that one person can see in their brain, right? You could 3D that mug all day. You could move around, imagine the VR that is your brain.
Right.
Like moving through a space as opposed to a movie which is like we got this side.
Well, even the smells and
everything.
Yeah.
And my other point, just going back really quickly, was even though I do like intentionality, some of the greatest things that come out of any story are they're just, somebody was feeling good that day and just put it in there, and they're just like, wow. So as much as I like to be intentional about a story, I know that some things just happen on a whim, and so you can never discard those things, and tell the story the way you would, and let the magic happen.
It's funny you mentioned that 24 frames assignment, because it sounds similar to an assignment I had in college for storyboarding. And that's what it sounds like, because we had to lay out our animations like that, which we call them keyframes.
Yeah.
That sounds exactly what he was saying. And I was just like, to narrow it down is insane, because when you do animation, you have major frames that you animate on, and then you have what we call filler frames or padding frames where you fill in, like if somebody's waving, basically the major frames are going to be when their hand is here.
And then you kind of write the
here,
line.
and then you have to draw the in-betweens.
Right.
And so that's kind of like, I was like, wow, that sounds just like what I did in animation school. And it's like, that's what they do in the, you know, the field, where they're just like, we want a storyboard and we just need to lay out how this whole entire episode's going to be. We can fill in everything later, but we need these keyframes and these visuals just so we can get the point across.
Yeah.
And that's where that popped in my head as soon as he said that. And I was just like, oh man, I'm having college flashbacks.
Some BTSD action going.
Yeah, my teacher just like, what is this? Like, redo it.
Because it's not clear. Yeah, and I think that's kind of like the main point of this conversation we both recently having is like the importance of like, what makes a narrative great? It's the impact. I think that's the biggest thing for me as I'm writing, is I'm constantly reading what I'm writing and I'm thinking, how did this really impact, character development or how a scene feels, or, things of that nature. That, to me, that's my biggest mission, is to make my story really impactful as you turn the page. What is something that's how I boil my writing process down to at this point. If you had to like boil it down to one word, what would you say is like how you're trying to approach your story now? I get it. It's tough. This is a What Do You Know show.
The way I'm trying to approach my story, I believe, is when I was beginning to rewrite it, because this is also a rewrite. So it's that's another thing I had to take into consideration. I've written 30 chapters of it so far. And when I say I was flexible with the story, the first arc is done. Like, it's completely written out, but it's like, it has to be typed up, it has to be edited. And the 2 arcs that follow are the ones that I'm still kind of brainstorming on. And it's like, I also have to be careful, because what happens in the first arc is going to impact those 2 arcs. And if I miss a plot point, if I miss a character development, if I miss a moment, it can be like, people will be like, well, wait a minute. Like, what happened to this character? This character, haven't mentioned them in 40 chapters. Where are they at? Like, I have to be careful. I think my approach to this story is, it's kind of maxed up with like the theme. And the theme is like the first thing that I wrote down when I was going through this story. And I was like, what do I want this story to be about? And I was like, and how do I want to approach it? And one of the things that I decided to approach it on was my journey to becoming a new born again Christian, and the struggles that I had went through and the way that has impacted my life. Because it was almost like, when I restarted the story, I had restarted my life as well. And this, I told you, this is almost similar to an autobiography. There's a lot of heavy influences from my life in it. But if people don't know who I am, they won't catch which events. Right. They'll just be like, oh, that's a cool like character development moment. But it's like people who actually, it's the way I like this story. Like, the reason I like it so much is because people who personally know me are going to take a different perspective and a different understanding from this story, because they know who I am personally versus some random person just reading it. They'll be like, oh, Easton did that cool thing. And they'll be like, wow, I remember when John was in Carpe Diem doing that, or he was in high school doing that. Like, I remember that about him. And he put that in his character. That's a cool moment. And it's like, it's to draw the people I already know closer to me, but to be relating like to other people in their journey, because other people may be just as confused and just as lost as I was before I wrote this story. And I think one of the things, like, I had never felt so inspired to write until the day I sat down and I prayed and I said, how can I use my talents and my writing and my art to glorify God? And that day I remember I called you. I was like, real, like, I don't know what I'm writing. Like, I'm just writing. Like, I was like, I don't know what's going on. Like, I don't know what's happening. But yeah, it was similar to that commission that you had given me. So yeah.
So in closing here, is there any way for the people to reach you? Because I know you're not on social media. Even if someone was interested, and I'll put some like pictures just at the end of the video, just kind of screenshots of what you've done for us, or anything you want to provide and show at the end of the video.
Oh, of course.
If there's any way, if you're
my main, I check my email every day. My email is jmwilliams, so it's WILLIAMS 91994 @gmail.com. That's for all business inquiries. Can have a discussion there. I will email you my commission prices if you are interested. And yeah, that's mainly where I can be reached. I don't have any other social media, so.
And so, are you open to commissions just based on?
At the current moment, no.
Okay.
I will be opening commissions soon after. I'd probably say in about a month's time.
Okay, then if anybody's interested, I guess I can just
But if they have inquiries,
start the contact, and then
Yeah.
they can get the ball rolling.
If they have inquiries, like I'll let them know if the commissions are open or whatnot, and when they'll
Fantastic.
be available. So.
Okay. Any last closing words, John?
I would
John the
say,
man.
thank you guys for having me. It was always a pleasure.
Oh,
Pleasure
yeah.
as always.
Loved our live studio audience. I just find myself
Fantastic.
constantly smiling being here. Love being here.
Bro,
around you guys.
and then I want to get you and Chris on for a show where we just go in on stuff. Just fun stuff. It's not like,
Definitely looking forward to Chris.
Absolutely. Griff, any last words?
Thank you to our studio audience.
Yes, the studio audience. This is like the 4th time in a row, I believe, studio audience.
And thank you to our
non.
non-studio audience, as always.
Because you always question, what do you know? This has been the What Do You Know show. Always question, what do you know? Signing off.